Where are you from? Many people ask this question when meeting someone for the first time. Proudly, I answer Washington, D.C. From my experience, people usually respond one of two ways. Either they are enthusiastic and would like to learn more, or they make reference to our crack era. The crack era is like the black eye that just won't go away. It annoys me when people bring it up. Here it is 2012 and people are still acting as if it is 1990. Yes, our mayor for life, Marion Barry, was re-elected after he was caught smoking crack. That era is over. That was then, this is now. And now, my city, the District of Columbia, is much more than an impoverished, crime and drug-riddled city of decay. We are a proud city, full of rich history and culture. And despite what is reported in the press, there is a great revitalization that is changing the face of this city in a major way. Let's start with the landscape. Washington, D.C. is a beautiful city situated between two major water systems. The Potomac and the Anacostia rivers provide a peaceful contrast to the hustle and bustle of the city. The previous and current administrations have worked diligently to make sure our city stays green and clean. Initiatives were put in place to make sure that the residents and tourists had clean areas to play and live. We even have an official department of our government called the Office of Clean City, whose job is basically to keep our streets and alleys clean and rat-free. You no longer have to live in the more affluent neighborhoods to enjoy clean and beautiful streets. In addition to having a clean and beautiful city, DC also has a number of national parks, recreation centers, and museums that are not just available to tourists. For instance, residents have close access to any of the museums and monuments located here. Take the Smithsonian Institute. They operate about 11 free museums as well as the National Zoo. All of the national parks in Washington, D.C. are free, as well as many of the recreation centers. Many of the recreation centers have been rehabbed or newly built with state-of-the-art amenities. Some of the recreation centers even have libraries. Having open access to our wonderful museums, national parks, and recreation centers creates a culture that aids to the value of our educational system. And speaking of education, major improvements have been made to the DCPS school system. Since DC receives funding from local, federal, and private resources, more funding is pumped into the school system. Despite what you may have heard in the press, things are looking up. At one point in time, the schools in DC were extremely old and basically falling apart. Today, DC has a 15-year, $3.5 billion campaign to completely rehab and rebuild the city schools. According to an article in the Washington Diplomat, the new facilities, as well as improving academics, may have an impact on what once was the country's lowest performing public school system. In 2010, school officials reported that enrollment had increased for the first time in 39 years. Still not convinced? Well, what about the reduction in crime? Let's not forget DC was once known as the murder capital. A little more than 2 decades ago, DC recorded approximately 470 murders. At the end of 2011, that number was at 108, the lowest since 1963. I remember my mother being so worried almost every time we left the house, and I'm sure there were countless others who felt the same apprehension. Being a DC police officer herself, she saw firsthand how crime and drugs were ravaging the city. This area seemed to be under siege. But like the great phoenix, we rose above the ashes, and today our communities are much more safer than they have ever been. And last but certainly not least, I am sure we all know someone that has been affected by this recessive economy. Unemployment rates at a national level are high. Nonetheless, Forbes recently named Washington, D.C. the best city for jobs. According to Forbes, over the next 4 years, the Washington, D.C. area is expected to add more than 250,000 new jobs. Most of the United States federal government is located here. This also brings in special interest groups that have business with the federal government thus creating jobs. DC also has initiatives in place to assist their residents with gaining employment, not limited to professionals. These programs expand to help the undereducated and inexperienced persons searching for employment. The competition is fierce here, but the resources are great. So there you have it. What you once may have thought of Washington, D.C. is no longer. D.C. is a striving, thriving city full of livable communities that are safe, clean, interactive, and flourishing. It is a city that all residents can be proud of. Just like any other city, we are not without problems. However, the drive to combat any problems is greater today than it has ever been. I feel like a proud parent whenever I speak of my city. We are a progressive city that many other cities borrow policies from. The nation's capital is ready to take the stake off of its black eye and put forth its best face. So next time you ask a person where they are from and they tell you Washington, D.C., before you frown, make sure you ask that person if what I have told you today is true. I'm sure they would agree, and at the end of the conversation, you just may be ready to move here. Thank you.